In the 30-year history of the Clean Air Act, the levels of sulfur dioxide have actually gone up in America's air, an astronomical 4% in a single year. About 4 months ago, I flew over the coal fields of the Appalachians, of eastern Kentucky and the Cumberland, West Virginia. And I've done that a lot over the past 10 years fighting mountaintop mining. And I had a six-week jury trial in West Virginia this year, which we won a record verdict in the state. But I got a chance to see this again, and every time I see it, it gets worse and more disturbing. And if the American people could see what I saw, there would be a revolution in this country, because we are cutting down the Appalachian Mountains with these giant machines called drag lines, which are 22 stories high. I flew under one of them in a Piper Cub. And they cost $500 million for one machine, and they practically dispense with the need for human labor, which indeed is the point. When my father was fighting strip mining in Appalachia back in the 60s, I remember a conversation that I had with him when I was 14 years old, where he said to me, they're not just destroying the environment, they are permanently impoverishing these communities, because there's no way that they will ever restore an economy from these barren moonscapes that they leave behind. And he said they're doing it so they can break the unions. And that's exactly what they did. When he told me that, there were 140,000 unionized mine workers in West Virginia digging coal out of tunnels in the ground. Today, there's only 11,000 miners left in the state. Almost none of them are unionized because the strip industry isn't. They're taking more coal out of West Virginia than they were in 1968. The only difference is, back then, at least they were leaving some of that money in the state for, for pensions and salaries and reinvestment in those communities. Today, it all goes straight up to Wall Street, to the corporate, headquarters of Massey Coal, Arch Coal, Peabody Coal, and the big banking houses that own most of the coal in the West Virginia, Morgan and Bank of America. 95% of the coal in West Virginia is owned by out-of-state interests, and and they're liquidating their state for cash. They're using these giant machines and 2,500 tons of explosives, which they detonate every day in West Virginia, the power of a Hiroshima bomb once a week. They're blowing the tops off the mountains to get at the coal seams beneath, then they take the rock and debris and rubble and they scrape it into the adjacent river valley and bury the valley. They've already, and the streams and the waterways, they've already, according to EPA, buried 2,200 miles of America's rivers and streams. They have cut down, and you can go to Google Earth, the homepage, and look at you can look at the mountain that was destroyed to heat your home by putting in your zip code. They've destroyed 460 of the biggest mountains in West Virginia. They're just holes in the ground. Some of them are 400 square miles that I flew over. And by the time they're done, they will have flattened an area of Appalachia the size of Delaware. And it's all illegal. You cannot in the United States take rock and debris and rubble and dump it into a waterway without a Clean Water Act permit. And you could never get a Clean Water Act permit to do such a thing. So Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, this heroic group over here, sued them in front of a conservative Republican federal judge, Judge Charles Hayden. And Judge Hayden said the same thing I just said to you. It's all illegal. It's been illegal since day one. And he enjoined all mountaintop mining. 2 days from when we got that decision, lobbyists for Massey Coal and Peabody Coal met in the back door of the Interior Department with Gail Norton's first deputy chief, Stephen J. Griles, and who was a former lobbyist for Massey Coal and Peabody Coal. And they rewrote the interpretation of one word of the Clean Water Act, the definition of the word fill, to change 30 years of statutory interpretation and effectively overrule Judge Hayden's decision and make it legal as it is today, not just in West Virginia and Kentucky, but every state in the Union, to dump rock, debris, rubble, garbage, any kind of solid pollutant into any waterway of the United States without a Clean Water Act permit. All you need today is a rubber stamp permit from the Corps of Engineers, which in some districts you could get over the telephone or through the mail. And this is what we're dealing with today. This is not just the destruction of our environment. It is the subversion of American democracy. And the big polluters and their slick PR firms and their indentured servants in our political process, have been very adept over the past couple of decades about marginalizing environmentalists as, as tree huggers or radicals or militants, or, as I heard the other day, pagans who worship trees and sacrifice people. But there is nothing radical about the idea of clean air and clean water for our children. And we are not protecting the environment for the sake of the fishes and the birds. We're protecting it, as I said at the outset, for our own sake, because we recognize that nature is the infrastructure of our communities. And if you talk to these people on Capitol Hill who are promoting this kind of rollbacks and ask them, why are you doing this? You have children too. What they invariably say, and these are the kind of people John Yarmouth has to deal with every day, what they invariably say is, well, the time has come in our nation's history where we have to choose now between economic prosperity on the one hand and environmental protection on the other. And that is a false choice. In 100% of the situations, good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy. If we want to measure our economy, and this is how we ought to be measuring it, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the long term and over the generations, and how it preserves the value of the assets of our community. If, on the other hand, we want to do what they've been urging us to do in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, which is to treat the planet as if it were a business in liquidation, convert our natural resources to cash as quickly as possible, have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, we can generate an instantaneous cash flow and the illusion of a prosperous economy, but our children are going to pay for our joyride. And they're going to pay for it with denuded landscapes and poor health and huge cleanup costs that are going to amplify over time and that they will never be able to pay. Environmental injury is deficit spending. It's a way of loading the costs. It's a way of loading the costs of our generation's prosperity onto the backs of our children. And one of the things that I've done over the past 25 years as an environmental advocate is to constantly go around and confront this argument that an investment in our environment is a diminishment of our nation's wealth. It doesn't diminish our wealth. It's an investment in infrastructure. The same as investing in telecommunications and road construction. It's an investment we have to make if we're going to ensure the economic vitality of our generation and the next generations. Now, I want to say one thing, which is this. There is no stronger advocate for free market capitalism than myself. I believe that the free market is the most efficient and democratic way to distribute the goods of the land, that the best thing that could happen to the environment is if we had true free market capitalism in this country, because the free market promotes efficiency, and efficiency means the elimination of waste, and pollution is waste. And a true free market would encourage us to properly value our natural resources. And it's the undervaluation of those resources that causes us to use them wastefully. But in a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. But what polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for the rest of us. And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his production costs. That's what all pollution is. Corporations are externalizing machines. That's what they do by nature. And they're constantly looking for ways to get somebody else to pay their cost of production. And if you're in a polluting industry, one of the easiest ways to do that is to shift your cleanup costs to the public and make yourself a billionaire by making the rest of us sick and contaminating us. And you know, if the Southern Company puts mercury up from its stacks in Mississippi and it falls on New York State and it poisons our children's brains and it makes it so I can't fish in my state anymore, I pay $30 for a fishing license every year. But I can't eat the fish anymore. The Constitution of the state says the people of the state own the fish. But today the Southern Company owns them. They privatize our public